welcome to another edition of the MDM podcast. I'm Mike Hockett, our executive editor. This episode is brought to you today by our upcoming Virtual Profitability Summit, which is set for December 4th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern and is free to attend. They'll provide 5 hours of profitability insights and best practices from executives in the channel. We've been off for a little bit, but we're back with what I think is a great career retrospective episode with someone who is a prominent name in the industrial MRO space. This episode features my conversation with Mike DeCata, who recently retired as CEO from Lawson Products, a distributor of MRO and automotive aftermarket parts based in Chicago. DeCata's career in the industrial supply space has spanned more than 40 years. The first 18 of them were spent at General Electric, giving him a supplier perspective foundation before spending the rest of his tenure in distribution. He remains active in the channel as an NAW board member. I had Mike share what he's most proud of during his time leading Lawson, as well as what he misses most about being a distributor CEO day to day and what he doesn't miss. Beyond that, we explored what Mike sees as the biggest fundamental changes in the channel and what he's keeping a close eye on today. Enjoy. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
You are well known to much of our audience here at MDM, as well as in the NAW community, but I always like to have our guests start with an introduction. So can you give a snapshot of your career in the industrial supply channel and where it's taken you?
Mike, thank you. Yeah, I've had a diverse career, and one of the things that has propelled me in my career is the intellectual curiosity. So as a result, I took different kinds of jobs, even within the same company. So by way of background, the first 18 years of my career, starting in 1979, was at General Electric. And at GE, I worked in a diverse bunch of businesses, from plastics to semiconductors, robots, so all over the company. After GE, Grainger, I worked for Grainger, and Grainger was the first real exposure I had to distribution. There were some incredible lessons learned at Grainger, and really, let me say, sunk the hook in me about my love of distribution. It was just a tremendous experience at Grainger. From there, after having been at Grainger a number of years, I went to United Rentals. And I went to United Rentals really to build a distribution business called Contractor Supplies, to service contractors' needs beyond rental equipment. But as so often happens in any new job, I showed up to find out that my job wasn't exactly as we had all planned, because 2 weeks before I got there, the VP of Fleet Operations left the company. So my boss, the CEO, said, by the way, congratulations, you're our new VP of Fleet Operations. Considering I didn't even know what this equipment did or what the meaning of these certain kinds of CapEx pieces of equipment were. But in that role, I had responsibility for buying, my team and I should say, $750 million a year of capital equipment of all kinds, specialized construction equipment. I also did lead the contractor supply business, which we grew tremendously to about $430 million. After that, I went to Chef's Warehouse, so still in distribution, but now having gone from industrial products and construction products to truffles, olive oil, cheese. I will tell you that my friends and family were far more excited about me bringing home truffles, olive oil, and cheese than nuts and bolts, but whatever. After that, I have a number of relationships with private equity firms focused on distribution. And that led me to Lawson Products. And I was the CEO of Lawson Products for about 9.5 years, and very proud of what we achieved there. It was tremendous. I've also been on the board of a number of companies and firms, a board of a company called Crescent Electric, a family-owned electrical distribution company, wonderful group of people. Board of directors of NAW, including chairman of the board a couple of years ago, which was a tremendous experience, and continuing involvement with NAW Institute, where I'm on the board there. So it's been a fun and diverse career.
Definitely a unique path there. And I have to assume that spending the first 18 years of your career at General Electric gave you some excellent perspective into the supplier side of the channel before spending the rest of your career in distribution. So looking back at those formative years, how were you able to apply everything you learned at GE to that second half of your career in distribution?
The GE experience was tremendous, and especially tremendous was the diversity of experience. Initially, in 1979, I'm a mechanical engineer, by the way. I started in power systems. These were several $100 million steam turbines, gas turbines. Had my first international experience there, flying on an airplane, at whatever it was, 21 or 22 years old, to deliver a $320 million proposal to Spain. That was kind of a unique experience for a really young guy. But at GE, I got exposed to diverse businesses and lessons learned that helped me for the rest of my career. I spent a lot of time in factories with GE Robotics, welding and painting and assembling products. A tremendous experience that would serve me later at Lawson, uh, spending a lot of time with those same kinds of people in factories and maintenance. GE Plastics was about engineering and science. Semiconductor, one of the things you have to learn when you go to all these different businesses, you have to learn humility very quickly. And making believe that you know more than a bunch of PhD scientists who report to you is a very bad idea.
Yeah.
So accept the fact that when you're a new person in a job, you have to do it with a very, very high degree of humility, even though you certainly probably bring unique knowledge, but it has to be applied to the unique situation at that business unit or that company. And starting out listening more and talking less and with a high degree of humility about what you don't know is always good advice. I learned that at GE, especially. I did also get exposed to a process orientation at GE. If there was anything that struck me about GE more than anything else I learned since, is GE had such a depth of talent that there was always someone you could find who knew something, who knew how to help and guide you. Big, big company. But from that, I took an important lesson. We always talked about core competencies at GE. And for me, that idea of what is a core competency evolved to a pretty difficult standard, which I said to people many times since then, was a core competency is when you can go in by yourself and do and teach that topic, execute that topic without having a lot of people around to help you. When there is no one to call for how do I do it or advice, you can claim that as a core competency when you can do it alone by yourself. Anything short of that, you're on shaky ground and you're saying you have a core competency, but you might need help.
Yeah.
I also got exposed at GE to Lean Six Sigma, which has carried me for the rest of my career. I am without doubt a Lean Six Sigma zealot. I'm a process oriented person. And when I say Lean Six Sigma and process, I mean you can apply it to human resources, you apply it to purchasing, you apply it to hiring people and sales, setting your sales price targets. Lean Six Sigma and a process orientation can be applied to everything. And I really first got exposed to that at GE.
I'm curious. Was that Lean Six Sigma exposure, was that immediate at GE? In those early years, or was it something further into your 18?
No, GE was not so much focused on Six Sigma, lean quality for me anyway, in the early years. Of course, being a technology company of quality and was always a part of you had to build everything. But I really got exposed to it at GE Plastics. I think it was around 1990 or so. A company by the name of Eckes and Associates, a very small consulting firm that we brought in. I also attended the Motorola Six Sigma School in Schaumburg, Illinois, which was just tremendous insight and really made me appreciate kind of the value of process orientation and variation around the target, reducing variation improves quality and consistency. But it was later in my career, and while having the day job, I also taught Lean Six Sigma.
Hmm.
And George Eckes from Eckes and Associates is really a role model, a mentor. By the way, stayed in touch with George after years and years and years and brought Eckes and Associates to Lawson about 2 months into my tenure with Lawson, and had a huge positive impact on our people, on our customers, on our profitability. So Lean Six Sigma was an important lesson learned, but there were others. Human resource development. GE has an extremely robust and refined human resource process of nurturing high potential people, identifying them, giving them cross functional experiences, which I employed everywhere else that I went since then. All kinds of best practices, whether, again, human resource, technology, change management, and understanding the resistance to change, all lessons learned that applied. And I will say, one of the ideas that came to me at GE was that everything you do and learn needs to be learned in the context of broad-based business understanding rather than the narrow application of that specific business unit. So GE Power Systems, steam turbine and gas turbines don't have a lot to do with plastics or food, but the underlying business processes, if you think about them as you're learning them, how is it broadly applicable, can serve you better than thinking about this stuff in the context of whatever business you happen to be in at the moment. And I will say that I had the privilege of working for some tremendous role models. Jack Welch was a brilliant speaker. His ideas were incredible, but others too. Dave Calhoun, who was about to retire from the chairman of CEO of Boeing, was an incredible person, role model in his personal conduct, in his mentoring of everybody associated with him. But beyond GE, I have to say, it wasn't just GE lessons learned. Dick Kaiser, who was the CEO and chairman of Granger when I was there, I learned an incredible amount from Dick. Dick is a reserved person. He's an understated kind of a leader. But one of the things that carried me forward, I remember Dick saying once, you can't sell from an empty wagon. He was talking about it in the context of balance as it relates to inventory turns. And yes, you always want better inventory turns, better cash flow as a result of your use of capital and inventory. But as an industrial distributor, you had to accept the long tail products that you have to have an inventory, but you don't sell them very often. And so there were key lessons learned that were then for me later applied to the food industry, to Lawson, the things I've done since then. So I could go on for a very long time about dozens and dozens of people and examples and things they said. By the way, one of the things Jack Welch used to say was, you face reality for what it is, not what you wish it to be.
Hmm.
He also said, you succeed in the long term by making your short term commitments. A very direct approach to you will make your short term commitments as best you can. So there were so many lessons learned along the way.
That's some just excellent perspective there. You retired from Lawson Products in 2022, shortly after it was combined with Test Equity and is it Gexpro?
Gexpro Services.
Gexpro Services to form Distribution Solutions Group. But as you mentioned, you're an NAW board member, and I'm sure you're going to remain plugged into the industry for years to come. So looking back recently now, is there anything you miss so far about the day-to-day of being the CEO of a large industrial distributor? And conversely, is there anything you don't miss, or is that something that you'd rather not touch?
Yeah, no. Look, there are a great many things that I miss about being CEO of a large company. The intellectual stimulation, the challenge of dealing with the environment as it is. I will say I miss the psychological rewards associated with success. I mean, that's a real day-to-day, excitement about achieving success. And if you're in a short cycle business like I was at Lawson or the food business or United Rentals or Granger, you get very quick feedback because it's a short cycle business. You know on a daily basis whether you're succeeding or not. And at Lawson, we were a data intensive business. We embraced data and analysis. So every single day, we practically had a P&L statement every single day of the month. So we could see how we did yesterday, and we did look at this stuff every single day as a management team. So there were those things that I missed. I also have to say I deeply miss the gratification of helping people, helping careers and develop high potential people, and helping people to achieve their goals and aspirations. We all have kids to put through college or mortgages to pay or hobbies and interests. And the gratification of helping employees develop, customers run their businesses and pay their bills and send their kids to college, suppliers be more successful and more profitable because of us as a middle between the production facility and the end use customer. All of that gratification of, let me say, doing good for other people is something I do miss.
Yeah.
And I will say I miss the openness and candidly, it's surprised the openness of the Lawson people. When you're the CEO of a company, people will generally appease you to a point. But if you ask them to do something to a point, they'll do it. But what I found at Lawson was people who were genuinely open minded. They were genuinely top to bottom in the company, not just senior, top to bottom in the company, genuinely intellectually curious. And I have to say, in a way that I had never experienced before, people who treat each other, peers, friends, with respect, open mindedness, courtesy, care under difficult times, COVID and others, put an arm around people and care for each other, which was such a unique experience for me. I really appreciated that. And I do miss that. It's something not to be taken for granted. Now, what do I not miss? Okay, I didn't miss budget season at all. I don't miss budgeting a bit.
Yeah.
I really don't miss trying to predict the future because, seeing the future is not an easy thing these days and never has been. But as cycles get shorter, technology gets faster, competition changes on a global basis, trying to predict the future is a hard thing. And it's usually a losing proposition, but you do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone's talking about the need for forecasting right now, and it makes sense. But yeah, it's still kind of the hardest nut to crack right now in the industry.
It is. One of the things that when I was at GE, one of the things that Jack Welch did, probably early in my tenure at GE, was we used to do a 5-year strategic plan. We used to do what's called session 2, which is the operating plan for the year, and then session 1, which was the 5-year plan. And I won't go into the long story of why he made this change, but he said, look, no one can predict the future 5 years in advance. This was a long time ago. And if you couldn't do it a long time ago, you sure can't do it today. He said, we're going to build a 3-year plan. Now, I don't think you can successfully build a good 3-year plan either, but it's not a 5-year plan. And so from that, the realization that it was fruitless to try and predict with any level of detail a 5-year plan because it was too much change too quickly. And even things that were happening 6 months into the future weren't foreseen, and they were big global things. It was happened to be, Iraq invading Kuwait. Well, 3 months before that happened, none of the business executives at GE saw it coming. And from that lesson, Jack said, forget this 5-year plan. Who are we kidding?
Well, a question I like to ask anyone who's recently retired from a long career in this industry, besides what they miss and don't miss, is
Sure.
what are the biggest things they've seen change over the years? And certainly technology is the obvious one, but I've also heard interesting perspectives when it comes to what's changed in the distributor supplier relationship and just what both sides expect from each other today. So, along that line, what would you point to as the biggest fundamental change you've seen in this industry, over the past 30, 40 years that you've watched it?
Certainly. There are a broad range of changes, myriad changes, some of which revolve around, the decentralization. There was a point where manufacturers wanted their own sales force, they wanted their own distribution, they would go direct from the factory to the end use customer. The inefficiency associated with transportation makes that difficult. The inefficiency associated with aggregation of multiple components that a customer needs. So all of those are roles that the distribution industry plays. There was a period, I think it was when I was at Grainger, when the internet and B2B internet was really coming online, and Grainger really led that. I mean, again, credit to Dick Kaiser for seeing far into the future And I would say seeing far into the future, even beyond General Electric and Intel and people who were real known and really known as technology leaders, and yet Dick Kaiser at Granger put money into building an internet long before anybody thought it made sense. But this idea of disintermediation and putting the distribution industry out of business because of the internet, well, that didn't happen. So there have been a lot of changes that I've seen, some of which looked very scary and looked like they were going to be cataclysmic in nature, turned out not to be. On the other side, labor, availability of labor demographics on a global basis wasn't as much of an issue 10 or 15 years ago as it is today, and it is every day. The pandemic hugely exacerbated that worldwide. Work from home, work remotely, availability of labor in general, employee turnover are all things that I've seen change relatively recently. The other one that is especially difficult to navigate as a senior executive is the push and pull of social changes, social pressures, navigating societal pressures. What's the role of a business or a business executive or business leader as it relates to key topics of the day, social change, political changes, so on and so forth. For me, I try and stay clear of that. I always believed, and again, lessons learned from GE, we need to comply with all regulations, the spirit, the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law and the regulations. But the further we get away from social engineering or taking sides, in my view, that's really not the role of a business. The business is to balance the needs of customers and suppliers and shareholders and employees and communities, but in the greater context of regulations and rules and norms of behavior. But CEOs didn't have to worry about that as much 10 or 20 or 15 years ago as they do today, every day. And we see it played out in all kinds of situations recently that I tried really hard to avoid.
So I think what I'm hearing is that the biggest change is that things have gotten much more complicated as your career has gone on.
And I think more amorphous. There are very few right and wrong answers. There's shades of gray on so many topics that are the hardest ones to navigate.
Well, during your tenure at Lawson as CEO, 9 years there, Lawson saw
Yep.
considerable growth during then, which included expansion via acquisition and organic, and certainly a lot of innovation on the sales organization within the company. What would you say you're most proud of from your time there at Lawson?
Again, I think I would probably divide that into three or four categories. First, employee engagement. We put a lot of time at creating a workspace for our employees where they felt great about the quality of the work they did. Lean Six Sigma, the driver for Lean Six Sigma, there are myriad external reasons to improve our quality and customer service and all the rest. But the leading internal driver of Lean Six Sigma was quality of your work life. Think about how much work we all do on an everyday basis that is a complete waste. It's redoing something that got to my desk not correctly. So I had to fix it before I could actually do my job. And it's not unusual to find 30, 40, 50% of your week or your day redoing something that didn't get to you properly. That's all waste. That's a waste of time and waste of my energy and waste of my career. So I'm very proud of the process orientation that Lawson embraced. And the result was higher quality work life for our employees. It also resulted in very significant growth with very, very little overhead growth. We were able to employ the people more fully in the jobs they wanted to be in because they were actually doing that job rather than the rework before they could do their job. So that's an area. I'm very proud of the culture at Lawson and Gexpro and Test Equity and the relationship we had with the private equity firm, Luther King Capital Management. Great teammates, just just a wonderful experience blending public market requirements, SEC, audit, justice, all the stuff you have to do to be a public company with the best of a really great private equity partner was a unique experience. And, being private, public, we are a publicly traded company with all the regulations associated. So very proud of that.
Yeah.
In a broader way, look, I'm proud of the work we did for customers. Process improvement, we reduced variation, our order fill rates. We had 92% revenue retention, which meant year in and year out, once we had a relationship with a customer, we very rarely lost it. That took hard work on the part of our sales team, on the part of our distribution teammates, people running the warehouses. Very proud of the fact that we grew, and this is before the stock split that happened a couple of years ago. Under my leadership, we grew the stock price from $5.96 to about $62, which is more than 1,000% stock price appreciation. Today, again, before stock 2-for-1 stock split, today we're $80, all right? Divide by two, $40. But we've continued really nicely. By the way, I think that's one way CEOs need to hold themselves accountable is what happens after you leave. I mean, a tremendously charismatic, successful CEO, when they leave, if the company falls apart or if the culture reverts or bad things happen, I think that's on the outgoing person, not the incoming person.
Yeah.
Circumstances do change, right? 9/11 happened 4 days after Jeff Immelt showed up as CEO. Right? Things happen, but the legacy of the outgoing CEO matters. So there are, and lastly, the financial success for the shareholders.
Yeah.
And again, whether you own a private family-owned company, success of that company for your family, or if you're a shareholder owned or PE limited partner owned company, they invest in you because they want a return on their investment. They have bills to pay and they want to, they want to be successful too. So the fact that we enriched employees, we enriched shareholders, employees, by the way, we enriched in their careers and their knowledge. Shareholders became great teammates. They gave us advice as to how better to communicate what we were doing. So those are things I'm proud of.
Yeah. Well, this was a smaller thing, but back in 2018, before I was at MDM, I wrote a story about the benefits that Lawson Products was seeing at that time from then recently adopting Microsoft Teams for its sales,
Yeah.
which really enabled them to communicate with each other and people at the back office faster to get answers to customers' questions much faster than before. So this was before, today everyone's using Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all these other communication platforms. But back in 2018, this was still pretty new stuff. So as one of the early adopters of that communication technology in this industry, how much did that help Lawson when the pandemic hit and so many others had to scramble to figure out how are we going to keep communications when, things are chaotic right now?
Yeah, Microsoft Teams for us, for me personally, came out of challenges I had at GE, really Power Systems, early 1980s. At that time, GE Power Systems had a large and diverse sales force, geographically remote all over the world, but I was mostly focused on the US and Canada at that time. But you had people with tremendous knowledge, but they had no easy way of sharing knowledge with each other. Now, in those days, it was not really possible to use technology in a cost-effective way to share knowledge. I mean, it did exist, but pretty esoteric and gargantuanly expensive. Fast forward with 1,000 sales reps at the time at Lawson, we had sales reps all over the place. We had 250,000 items. And how do you become knowledgeable enough to solve customers' problems with all that diversity of products and applications? Not even just the products, but the application of the products was different based on the industry you're in. So it really came out of a huge problem of how do I get knowledge shared between people who won't physically see each other, they're in the field and they're alone. You can never afford to hire enough corporate people to answer their questions. So it really bubbled out of necessity to try and help sales reps be more effective in answering customer questions. It has had a huge impact. It had a huge impact in a couple ways. First, I talked about 92% revenue retention. But what customers buy from Lawson are the kinds of things they're consuming. They need it, and they generally need it now. It's not a sort of a forward planning thing. It's a maintenance item. And I'm only maintaining something that's either broken or about to break. So I don't have the luxury of waiting weeks and months to find something. It's broken. I got to fix it. So it enabled us to more quickly share knowledge. And where does the knowledge reside? Right, the knowledge resides in all the sales reps and the product managers who live with the stuff every day. Sales reps see these products apply in the real world, dirty environment of maintenance shops. So they have more knowledge, and collectively, they have far more knowledge than anybody else in any other capacity. So it's had a huge impact on revenue retention, on customer service, on cycle time compression as it relates to answering customers' questions and getting them up and running. But secondarily, it's also had a huge impact on the psychology of sales reps.
Mm.
Right? Because when you're a sales rep, I was a sales rep early in my career in the robot industry, you're in the car by yourself alone. It can be lonely. Yes, there's a degree of freedom, but it's a lonely kind of thing. Microsoft Teams enabled you to feel like I've got 1,000 teammates with me every minute of the day. And anytime I ask a question, I can get an answer.
Yeah.
Now, the goal in establishing Microsoft Teams was just that, getting answers to questions. That was the first. So the first step was just getting sales reps to participate. That was the first goal. The second goal was cycle time compression. In the perfect world, I was hoping that when a sales rep asked any question, by the way, in their shorthand, cryptic way, the way they talk to each other, shorthand, if we could get an answer very, very quickly in front of the customer, best, it would almost feel like I had 1,000 people with me on every sales call. Tremendously effective for the customer and solving the customer's problem right now. But the psychological impact of not being alone and trying to answer a technical question from a customer, where do I start? I will say, fast forward, just recently at one of the innovation conferences, I came across the new technology. It's artificial intelligence, but it's a large language model. And we're just now beginning to explore and experiment because we've captured all the historical questions and answers in the archives.
Yeah.
Well, initially, that was a really good thing. But after 7 or 8 years, there's thousands of questions and thousands of answers. And now we have too much data, which we can't find.
Yeah.
Well, a large language model can find it. And the large language model, generative AI, can act just like another sales rep person. It'll give you an answer like a sales rep would give you an answer. Now, the sales reps will continue to generate answers, which the large language model will also incorporate into its next answer. So, tremendous evolution, effect on sales revenue, profitability, cycle time compression, and psychology of our sales reps.
It's fascinating what not only distributors are doing with LLMs, not only for their own internal purposes, finding answers very quickly for customers, but also offering these LLMs to customers to let them search. If they want to just search something within Lawson, it's just going to get them an answer, a specific answer, I think, faster than they could just by Googling things like that. So it's just very fascinating what's happening on that front. And then with that, like you mentioned, you were at NAW's Innovator Summit, like I was in late September in Austin. It was my first time there. It had some excellent content sessions on just different ways distributors can innovate with technology, and certainly particularly with AI. So was there one or two key takeaways that you left that event with?
Well, the use of generative AI and large language models was certainly one. And now, we've been exposed to it in previous innovation conferences, previous ones that I've attended. But like all of it, it's evolving, and it's evolving quickly. So, leading edge, or they used to say bleeding edge technology is kind of cool, but it's expensive, it's inefficient, and we all have day jobs. And so, there's always the balance of wanting to lead and innovate and drive profitability or retention or whatever because of it. And the practical reality of, is it real? Can I get it done? Can I afford the time and effort and the manpower, labor effort to get it done? Well, I think we're now getting to the point where the models, the technology is far enough along. Now, one of the things we didn't hear about that I think will come is additive manufacturing. 3D printing is a real thing. Uh, Software right now is a little sexier, AI is a little sexier, but I think there's innovation happening in many ways. The use of more sophisticated inventory modeling software, which again Lawson has been using for a number of years, to better optimize inventory and better analyze the cycle time between order and delivery from the supplier to Lawson, and then from Lawson to the customer, and then the inventory levels that you need based on all the other variables associated with the supply chain. Uh, so these are not quite as sexy sounding as large language models and generative AI, but just as important. So across the board, the innovation conferences I found exposed me to all kinds of new ideas and new thinking. There's also innovation as it relates to work from home or geographically remote work. And we're all, as business leaders, trying to balance the social needs and the desires of our limited labor force. And it's very hard to get super high quality people and keep them motivated. So, there are questions around human resources and there are positives associated with giving people the ability to work from home, but there are negatives associated with teamwork and collaboration and feeling part of a close knit community. So, so all of these are forms of innovation. They all require deep thought, and they all have consequences.
And then also on the NAW front, you served as a guest speaker in NAW's Management Academy, which is going on right now as a 10-week digital program that provides skills, knowledge, and resources to help industry staff master organizational leadership, people management, and financial acumen. Specifically, you were on there to help lead insight into the topic of building the right team and focusing on having the right team and the right customers. Not that we need to share everything that was given there, but can you give a little bit of a recap of what your key messaging there was?
Yeah, again, there was a couple of sessions we talked about these topics, and I think certainly business acumen, the right credentials and experience, all critical. But the right personality, the ability to be part of the team and have a personality that works in the context of the cultural values of the company. Sometimes it's intellectual, sometimes it's high energy, sometimes it's globalism, could be empathy, teamwork among people with different perspectives, especially true in society right now. The ability to work with people with different points of view than you do, the ability to be committed, deeply committed to personal excellence in serving customers and working with suppliers and fairness and balance, maybe in executing your company's values. One of the things about value, again, I learned this at GE, is values are often tested in the negative. So everybody talks about integrity. Okay, integrity isn't really being tested when there's no price to pay for your integrity, for your choice. Integrity is tested when there's some price to pay. It might be dollars, it might be to the company, maybe to you personally to do the right thing. So finding people that both have the right knowledge and competency, but also the right personal orientation, the right values in themselves. And when I say values, I mean the obvious values people right, but intellectual curiosity is a big part of it. Uh, a team that sees something that looks a little odd and wants to dig in without being told to dig in to understand, is this real, or to use quality terms, is this a special cause event? We can ignore it. So personality matters at least as much as what a person brings in the way of competency or previous experience. Look, none of us were born with any of the knowledge we have. We learn all of it. So I was always more focused on the person, their desires, their personal drive, their commitment to personal excellence, their intellectual curiosity, because you can learn anything if you have a desire to learn it. That's hard. The other thing I will say, back to the mechanics of leadership and finding the right people, hiring, nurturing people, paying attention. People caring for each other, building a culture where people care for each other, building a culture where leaders pay attention to their high potential people, where they identify people and invest in them. Maybe they invest in a cross-functional assignment. Anytime you put someone into a cross-functional assignment, there's always a functional expert that can do the job better and faster initially. But if you're making a long-term investment in a person, giving up a little short-term benefit to the company for the long-term benefit of cross-functional knowledge. So ultimately that person can deliver better cross-functional insight, better insight as it relates to profit and loss or customer service or balanced choices that have to be made. All of those are things associated with leadership and identifying the right person, not only the right person coming into the job, but also promoting the right people. People who think both horizontally over multiple sort of segments and ideas and over longer time frames. If you can do that, the better you are at that, the more unique you are as a person and as a leader.
And also during a different NAW leadership session, you told what I thought was a really valuable story about how earlier in your career, when you were at GE, there was a time where you were unable to convince your higher ups to switch one of the plastic polymers that they were using to a more sustainable material, and you weren't trying to convince them that it was going to be more eco-friendly but more cost-effective. And
Yeah.
I think you summed it up as saying you saw it as a failure on your end, which I just found really curious. And I was hoping you could summarize, why you reached that conclusion and maybe just why that stuck with you kind of this whole time.
Yeah, this was a very, very long time ago, and it feels very fresh to me today, as it has since then. So, the idea here was that price of oil was going up, and of course, the price of polymers tracks very closely with the price of the raw materials you put into the polymer, all the chemicals. And as the price of oil was going up like crazy, there was a thought that through some fairly complex, what's called depolymerization, and it is done. Carpet fibers are often depolymerized, nylon, for example, depolymerized, and then you repolymerize it back into what seems like virgin feedstock. It's complex, it's difficult, but the argument was that we will be fully compliant with worldwide environmental requirements, regulatory requirements, but we don't want to lead on that subject because it can be insanely expensive and like no return for it. So that was the logic at the time. And it was a well embedded logic. And again, we at GE set the standards for the most difficult place. Europe at the time had much tougher environmental standards than US regulatory at the time, quite a number of years ago. And because it was so embedded, when my team and I went to our senior executive, who at the time was running a $6 billion division, his response was just what I said. We're going to be fully compliant, but we're not going to lead on this subject because we don't understand how to lead on this subject. What it really was, though, was a cheaper feedstock. If you could, instead of refining basically oil and petrochemicals into polymers, if you could depolymerize and turn it back into the equivalent of virgin materials, then it was lower cost. I couldn't convince it. No, this was capital intensive. This was building huge, expensive chemical plants, like building a brand new chemical factory. These were really expensive investments. But ultimately I failed. And I think I feel bad about it because I think had more companies done more chemical, I'm not talking about recycling, like remelting plastic, it degrades. I'm talking about turning it back into virgin material. Today, we still don't do enough of that. And it's a lost opportunity for recycling.
Well, yeah, sorry to make you dig that back up, but I just thought it was always an interesting example you shared there.
Well, there are experiences in your career that, really have an impact. They may be very positive successes you've had or positive experience, disappointments, setbacks along the way, all can be really, really instructive for your future. They can all have a positive impact on your ability to lead or deal with adversity in some cases, or understand why success happened. Um, and that's one example. There are dozens of other examples, some successes, some failures along the way. And I think by thinking through what, why, how it happened, why we succeeded, why we didn't succeed, if you're truly conscious, then you can bring that to your next problem, your next career step, or your next company. Um, and they get the benefit of all your previous successes and failures.
Well, I'd like to finish here with a look ahead at kind of the industrial supply market in general. 2024 it's on pace to end up as a pretty soft, essentially flat demand year in
Yeah.
terms of industrial distribution revenues for most markets. There's some that are outperforming or underperforming others. But the MDM forecast right now is projecting about 0.2% annual revenue growth for industrial supplies distributors, with a much healthier 3.7 growth in store for 2025. With 2024 coming to a close now, I guess what is your expectation for the business climate next year, which I'm sure will be impacted, at least in some ways, by a newly reelected President Trump?
Certainly. Well, with the caveat that nobody can predict the future, who knows what happens in the Mideast? Who knows what happens with Taiwan? So, those are very big possible things that would have a huge global impact on supply chain, customers, suppliers, employees, everybody. Putting that aside, I think geopolitical implications of onshoring. I mean, we should control a little bit more of our own critical needs, and that'll bring factories back to North America, to the US, to Canada, to Mexico, and that'll have a positive impact on industrial distribution. Food production, same thing. I mean, the more we can be, let me say, a little bit more self sufficient. I don't mean isolationist, but a little more self sufficient. All would have a positive impact on bottoms up business growth and all the implications of that. Now, on the other side, labor will continue to be a challenge. I think we in the distribution industry need to find a way of communicating how important distribution is, but not only how important it is, how intellectually stimulating it is. One of the lessons I learned from going from GE, which was really high tech stuff, to Granger was the idea that what a distributor does, a maintenance distributor like we are at Lawson or like Granger is, or other companies like MSC, people like that. If my light bulb fails, I'll get you a new light bulb. It's simple. It's really intellectual. Now, when you add volume, when you add a million items, when you add huge inventory moving all at the same time, it's scale that brings complexity, not the individual transaction or the technology associated with selling you a light bulb. So, all of those things are challenging. We need to find a way in the distribution industry to communicate broadly, both to our political leaders, to students, to people in other industries, how critical distribution is to the overall system success. We represent about $8 trillion of the US, a trillion with a T, that's 1/3 of the US economy goes through distribution. But if you ask people, what does a distributor do? Huge percentage of them have no idea what a distributor does. So all of these are changes that are coming. I think labor is a change. Inflation continues to be a challenge. There'll be changes coming to the workplace. I mean, people trying to pull employees back. Employees now have had a real taste of working remotely, with the positives and probably the negatives associated with that. Very worried about geopolitical. But I think onshoring, by the way, if we produce more and lower cost energy, that'll have a positive impact on cost reduction at all levels, not only your car, but how we run factories and how we move, how we grow food. Fertilizer comes from petrochemicals. So a lot happening. I think 25 is going to be a great year for us. I think it's going to be a great year for the distribution industry. And as we apply more and more technologies, AI, additive manufacturing, more sophisticated relationships between customers and suppliers, with distributors in between, all of that bodes well for the future. And the more young people we attract to the distribution world, the better off we're going to be.
Well, that is everything I had for you, Mike. I think this was just a really nice retrospective on your career in the industry and some of these big things that you've seen happen. With that, I think we are ready to sign off. So this has been the MDM podcast, and thanks once again for joining.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the MDM podcast, which was brought to you by our 2024 Virtual Profitability Summit, set for December 4th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern, and is free to attend. You can find all of our past podcast episodes at mdm.com/podcast and wherever you listen to podcasts.